What's going on, guys and gals? It's the Tyrant here. Welcome back to the channel. I have a very special guest for you today. It is HiddenXperia, the iconic king of Halo lore.
Thank you very much, dude. Happy to be here. Happy to be talking about something that, for once, isn't actually Halo. This is a very exciting time.
It is a very exciting time. We're actually going to be branching off a little bit today. HiddenXperia is going to be experimenting with doing Resident Evil lore on his channel, so I thought I'd have him over here, where we've been doing Resident Evil for the last several years now. And yeah, so we're going to get started today with this is part of a trilogy of videos that we're going to be doing for the remake of Resident Evil, the trilogy. So we're going to start with Resident Evil 3. The first thing I want to ask you, HiddenXperia, is what was your first reaction when you played Resident Evil 3 for the first time?
A mixture of horror and intrigue. My first exposure to Resident Evil 3 was, I believe, that in like 2008, they ported it to iOS. And this is going to sound like heresy to some people, but my first exposure to the game, or at least my first time playing it, was that iOS port. Or it was either an iOS port or an emulator port. I believe it was iOS. I'm pretty sure it was, because it was the same for Resident Evil 2 as well. And I remember being quite confused, because the only game that I'd ever played before with tank controls was Metal Gear Solid 2. And I loved that game, but it was very unique to me. It was the only game of that kind that I was, like, used to. So playing another one was a bit weird at first for me, but what little I played of the original one back in the day, I really enjoyed. Again, this is, my god, this is like the worst form of heresy on planet Earth, but I actually didn't grow up very young playing Resident Evil. My first like proper exposure to the franchise was, and I apologize beforehand for saying this, I really genuinely do. You know what's coming. The movies was my first exposure.
Oh no!
Yep. I'd played.
What was your first Resident Evil movie?
The first one. I saw the first one not too long after it came out.
Nice.
And then I played Resident Evil 4 briefly at a cousin's house in like 2004, 2005. And I remember getting to the chainsaw Ganados and being terrified and not wanting to play anymore. And then I literally didn't touch that game again for like another 10 years. And then in 2015, I finally was like, you know what? I need to replay this game and actually play it all. And I realized what I've been missing for God knows how long. But no, my first exposure to Resident Evil 3 was a weird one. A very weird exposure.
Now, let me ask you this. Of what you have played with the original Resident Evil 3, what was the most, and I have to say it, iconic moment that stood out for you?
Honestly, Brad's death. Brad's original death. When it's like just outside the RPD, and like you and Jill and Brad are there, and then Nemesis drops out of nowhere and just destroys Brad. Like that to me is quite iconic, and that's one of the things I'm a little bit upset that they changed in RE3 Remake, but I'm sure we'll get onto that later on.
Oh, we will. Sorry.
Oh my god! See, that bit was kind of cool. I'm not gonna lie. I actually kind of liked that. It added even more humanity to Marvin, but at the same time, it's like Brad's original death was really cool. It was quite a shock as well, and I kind of.
It was also the first appearance of Nemesis.
Yes, exactly, and like what a way to show him off for the first time.
It was an excellent way. So let's start out with, all right, so obviously Resident Evil 3 is using the same engine as Resident Evil 2 Remake.
Yep.
Okay, so for those of you who've seen my review, you know how I feel about this. I still honestly feel like Resident Evil 3 Remake would have been better as DLC for Resident Evil 2 rather than a standalone $60 game. What's your take on this, HiddenXperia?
I love the game to death, RE3 Remake, but I agree entirely. It didn't need to be its own game. I feel like, so this is just my theory, but I feel like originally it was going to be a DLC, and Resistance was going to be its own game, and then they were like, hang on, there's not enough interest in Resistance, let's package the two together. Sort of like what Infinity Ward did with COD 4 Remastered and Infinite Warfare. I feel like that might have gone on behind the scenes, maybe. That's just my theory, but I have a feeling that it might have done. But I agree, it should have been DLC. It should have been DLC, because I feel like if it was DLC, people would have maybe been a bit more open to the fact that certain areas were cut and that the story wasn't quite what it originally was. I feel like people would have been more open to that if it was just DLC as opposed to it's like a standalone game.
I'm really glad you brought that up because there was cut content from this game, and there were two major areas in particular that really bummed me out when they weren't included with the Resident Evil 3 remake, and one of those was the clock tower.
Yes. Yeah.
The clock tower was an extremely epic portion of that original Resident Evil 3, and it's also the first time that you actually fight Nemesis in his second form, which they kind of held true to in the remake, but at the same time they didn't.
Yeah.
And so that really threw me off. The second portion that they left out, which I thought was, again, I have to say it, the most iconic moment in the original Resident Evil 3 was when you saw zombies rising from the grave in the graveyard, where you actually fight the gravedigger for the first time, which is completely absent in the remake, by the way.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to mention as well, because they sort of teased that being a thing, kind of, in the remake. When you first get to the RPD, obviously it's not the same place, but when you first get to the RPD, Terrell and Carlos are talking about the graveyard, and I was like, oh, hang on, they moved it to the RPD. But then, nothing happens.
Nothing happened.
Then nothing happens. Oh, that was a cool setup. Like, even if they didn't do the Gravedigger boss, even if they just had, like, some zombies literally rising out of the graves there, that alone would have satisfied a lot of that need, I think. But they kind of just left it a little bit.
It would have. It certainly would have indeed. In fact, it would have been great if they had set that up in Resident Evil 2, which they sort of did, right? They sort of put that in Resident Evil 2 when you start out as Claire.
Oh, yes. Yes, you're right. They did, actually.
And so to have that carry over into Resident Evil 3 and have those corpses rise up from the grave would have been just a very good way of putting things at full circle. But they didn't do that. And I'm just kind of like, that was such a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like missed opportunity is sort of like the definition of this entire game. Like, I don't like criticizing it, because I still, regardless of my issues with Resident Evil 3 Remake, I still love the game. I still think it's an absolutely incredible game. It's just nowhere near as good as it could have been. Like, if it was done in the fashion that it was, but in a very, like, true to its nature way. So include the clock tower, include all the cut puzzles, the park, the worm boss, the gravedigger, the graveyard, all that would have been so good in that style. But the game was either rushed or, I don't know. I honestly, the only thing that I can think of is
it was definitely rushed. I mean, it came out a little over a year after Resident Evil 2 came out. So I already knew they were going to reuse a lot of the assets. I mean, all right, so let me back up a little bit here. Resident Evil 3, the original one, was very much an extension of Resident Evil 2, the original one.
Yeah.
And it made sense that they did the same thing. I guess to a point, they reused a lot of assets. It didn't feel like a full game in comparison to Resident Evil 2 because it was basically half a campaign. So they did hold, to give them credit, they did hold true to that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
the question is, could they have done more?
Yeah, I do honestly feel like they should have gone the direction they were originally going to go with the original games, with the remakes. So they should have had 3 be a DLC for 2. That would have worked out fine. And then remade Code Veronica and had that sort of replace 3 as the third game in the trilogy, because originally that was meant to be the third game in the trilogy. I mean, the story makes it quite clear that it was meant to be, and also, like, a load of behind-the-scenes stuff that came out after the game released was, like,
right,
that Code Veronica was meant to be the third game, and then they got swapped around. I feel like if they'd done that and then remade Code Veronica, like, RE2 style, full-on, like, faithful remake, or as faithful as possible, and then had that release maybe like this year or next year to give it more time, I feel like that would have been a lot better, because I mean, RE2 sold a lot, like the remake sold a lot of copies, so there would have been a lot of people willing to buy DLC of RE3, I think.
Oh, absolutely, and we are definitely going to touch upon Code Veronica in a little bit, because I definitely want to get to that in this video. Let's move on to the opening of Resident Evil 3 Remake. This is one of the strong points I feel like was in the game, because if you look at the original Resident Evil 3, the apartment sort of just explodes, Jill dodges out, and then the game begins. But here you actually get to see what happens, and that's the fact that Nemesis comes up first. So what did you think about the opening to this game versus the classic game?
The opening to this one was quite clearly meant to be a lot more cinematic, and it was meant to set the scene of the entire game more. I mean, not just like throwing Nemesis at you when you get to the RPD, but actually like having the game open pretty much with Nemesis was it was I don't know if it's better or worse, honestly, because in one way it makes the game feel more cinematic and it sets the scene for the entire game, but at the same time the sort of shock value of him randomly showing up at the RPD and killing Brad was also great. So I don't know if I prefer it or don't prefer it, but I think it was a really strong opening. Even though it was very scripted and very on rails, it sets the tone of the story and of what's going down in Raccoon City really, really, really well. Like when you run into Brad as well and you see just the complete hysteria on the streets and everyone just going crazy, it sets the tone of the game so well. So the intro to me, even though it's different and not good, not better different or not worse different, I still think it was really good, and it worked for what it was meant to do.
That's very well put. Now, let me ask you this. Since we talked about the intro, let's talk about the introductory cutscenes for both games. In my opinion, the original Resident Evil 3 had an epic opening to it. Yeah. I mean, you saw the cops, they were all lined up. They have this line of fire that they're drawing against the zombies, and they just get overtaken, which I feel like is a fetish for Capcom, because they did the same for Dino Crisis 2. But it was an epic opening. They even redid it for Resident Evil Apocalypse. Since you were talking about the movies earlier, they did something very similar to it.
Yeah.
And to me, that was a very epic way to open up a game. Now, when you compare that to the way they did the live-action cutscenes in Resident Evil 3 Remake, to me, that just did not have the same punch.
I agree. Again, I did like the RE3 Remake intro, but I do find it quite ironic how of all the things to do the intro to Resident Evil 3 more faithfully, it was the goddamn movie. Of all the things to do it faithfully, it was the movie. Yeah, I was going to mention as well, like the original cutscene with the cops with the RPD getting overrun. That was so cool, and not having that in the remake kind of sucked. I mean, you don't even get a glimpse of it. It's just not there. That would have been really cool to have, but at the same time, I kind of like the intro to Remake. Not gonna lie, it does suck that they didn't have any zombies in it at all. Like there was just random videos of like riots and people going crazy. Like I'm pretty sure they actually used stock image of some of the London riots from 2011 in there. I'm pretty sure.
Oh yes.
I thought that I recognized some of it. So yeah, it was different. I prefer the original one definitely, but I do think the tease of Nemesis was kind of cool. I feel like if they'd not had Nemesis be in the intro, have him be in like the cinematic intro to the game, but not have him show up until the RPD, that would have been really good. Because like the fans who had never played original RE3 and didn't know the story, they would have been left waiting. Like, wait, what's this bioweapon Nemesis thing? What was that case, that thing those scientists were making? What was that thing? And then all of a sudden, like, bam, he shows up. Like, that would have been so much better.
It was a hushed casket.
Yeah, there you go. Halo reference, boys. Yeah, no, that would have been so cool. Saving it a little bit, saying like building the tension up and having the fans like question what that was and almost in a way kind of forget about Nemesis in the intro. I feel like if they'd left it and had him show up for the first time at RPD in the remake, people who have never played it before would have probably kind of forgotten about Nemesis in the intro and would have sort of pushed it to the back of the mind and been like, oh, this is just zombies and weird like swamp creatures, there's nothing else here. And then bam, Nemesis shows up, bam, Brad is dead. Like, oh, that guy's back. I feel like that would have been a lot better.
No, that's an excellent point. I will say that it's interesting that they chose the cutscenes that they did for the intro just simply because of the times that we're living in right now. I don't want to say the name of the virus because if I do, I'm going to get demonetized. But it really hit close to home. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, one of the first things I said to myself when I saw the intro was like, damn, did they film this yesterday?
It was indeed a little bit nuts. Now, all right, so extending from Resident Evil 2, what did you think of the new dodge mechanic for Jill Valentine?
I don't hate it. I thought it was quite, not entirely faithful, but it was quite a good sort of like upgrade for RE3's original dodge. I do think it gets a bit too easy sometimes. Like when you start to learn the animations for the zombies and the grabbing animations, you can do it perfectly a bit too easy, even without Chris Redfield's like Stars handbook. But I don't know, I kind of like it. It's useful in boss fights. maybe a little bit too useful. But I don't know. I think it's alright. People have been criticizing RE3 Remake for being too action focused, and I mean, original RE3 was more action focused. I do understand the complaint, but the game was more action focused originally, so the remake, of course, is always going to be more action focused as well. But my only complaint will be that it's maybe a little bit too easy, and that slow-mo thing that you get for doing it successfully is too much, I think.
Now, what do you think about it being a replacement for secondary weapons? Because, as you know, in Resident Evil 2, whenever you got attacked by a zombie, for example, and you were taken off guard, if you had a secondary weapon like a dagger or a taser or a grenade, you could throw that or utilize it, and it would basically save you.
Yeah.
But in Resident Evil 3, that is completely absent. They don't have that anymore. Instead, you have the dodge mechanic, and that's it. Which do you find to be superior?
I feel like what they should have done is have the dodge mechanic be only there in Nightmare and Insane, and then have Assisted, Standard, and Hardcore have the secondary weapon. That way, it sort of changes up gameplay a little bit based on difficulties. You get the best of both worlds. And also, the sort of default difficulty of Standard feels more true to Resident Evil. Because, I don't know, the secondary weapon mechanic is, at least for the original trilogy, quite an, dare I say, iconic aspect of it. I feel like now, because when you get bitten, when you get grabbed by a zombie, like, that's it. There's no getting out of it. No matter what you've got, no matter what you've done to get yourself prepared for that situation, you're gonna lose health, and there's no getting out of that. Weirdly, it's a bit too harsh. And yeah, obviously, I get that dodging was meant to offset that harshness, the harshness in the change, but I feel like it should have been there at least in some difficulties.
No, I think you make an excellent point, and it would have been nice just to see that mechanic carry over to Resident Evil 3 as well. The dodge mechanic would certainly be more useful in hard and nightmare mode, for sure. But moving on from this, I want to talk about Nemesis a little bit, because Nemesis is definitely a lot different in this game than he was in the original Resident Evil 3. There were some badass moments, of course, when Jill ran him over with the car, but outside of that, Nemesis is not in this game very much.
Especially
and when he is,
he's...
Yeah, exactly, and he's very scripted. I was really hoping that Nemesis in this game would be very similar to Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 Remake.
Yeah.
But that was not the case. So what was your take on Nemesis in his first act appearance?
Well, for me, as much as I enjoyed it, it made me miss the clock tower even more. Because the clock tower was the part that was a bit like RE2, where Nemesis was stalking you and he was like always there, he was following you, like he was always 2 steps behind. And having Nemesis be overall more scripted made the clock tower section feel even more missed and just like it should have been there. Because it would have been a nice break from having like just a scripted run event or like a scripted fight event. It would have been a nice break from that. I don't know, I'm not... I like the new design for Nemesis overall. The face, I think, is a bit weird. I much prefer the classic face, but the safety, like the warning tape and like the...
He's got some weird dental problems, that's for sure.
Just a little bit. The guy's teeth are massive. They're huge. Yeah, I'm not keen on the face, but the overall design I like. I just wish it wasn't scripted or as scripted. I mean, I'm trying to think. The only time where the encounters aren't scripted are when you're coming back from the substation. And you're going to turn on the... you're going to go change the tram lines. I believe that is the only section in the entire game where he's not scripted, which is kind of a bit sucky, a little bit.
Is that the bit where he has the rocket launcher?
No, that's before that. So when you come back from the substation, when you've turned it back on, you've destroyed the Drain Demo Hive. When you're coming back and you burst through the wall, and then you have
Finally,
to run...
someone who actually says the enemies correctly. People kept calling him chimeras from Resident Evil 1, and I was like, no, they're Drain Demos.
Demos, not chimeras. Very different things. Very different things. Yeah, no, that's the only section I'm pretty sure that isn't scripted. And it's kind of good, because you're running around a little bit, and all of a sudden Nemesis will show back up again. And it's fun. You get this sort of vibe that like that was what it was meant to be originally, and obviously it was. But everything else is scripted, which kind of sucks.
It does. Now, I will say I did enjoy the first boss battle with Nemesis with the flamethrower.
Yes.
Because that was completely new and off guard. You know, in the Resident Evil Apocalypse movie, he had 2 weapons as well. One was his rocket launcher, of course, and the other was a Gatling gun.
Yeah.
Which he used to wipe out the entire STARS team, which still baffles me to this day. How that sniper was able to take out a zombie with a headshot on a dime, but he kept shooting Nemesis in the chest, and I'm like, well, I think we all know where this is going.
Yeah, that scene was kind of dumb where like all the stars are like getting like ready to fight him, and they just stand there as he starts shooting them with a minigun. Like they don't. Some of them don't even take cover. It's like, come on, at least like, you're meant to be stars for God's sake. You're like the elite of the elite. Do something that makes sense, please. But that's a whole that movie is a whole other debate for a whole other video. My God, I could.
It is, but I will say this: out of all 7 Resident Evil movies, I think there's 7 of them. There's either 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think there is 7. There's. Yeah, there's 7.
Okay, so I will say this. I feel like Resident Evil Apocalypse was the most faithful to any of the Resident Evil games.
It was, but that movie, I used to really enjoy that movie. Like, even when I started getting into the games more, I still liked that movie for what it was. But now that I've, like, fully resubmerged myself into RE3, I really don't like it anymore because they completely rob Jill of all of her character arcs and just give them all to Alice. Like, that scene in the church where Alice first shows up, that scene, like, actively annoys me now. Because it's like, that Jill was meant to do something there. That was a situation that was meant to build Jill's character, and that was meant to fit her character. And this stupid character that can apparently do anything she wants to just comes out of nowhere, somehow bursts through a massive stained glass window on a motorbike, and kills the licker. Like, oh no, that's what Jill was supposed to do. And Sienna Gilroy
well, that was one of the big
well.
flaws of the franchise in general, is that they didn't give the parts to the main characters of the video games. I mean, Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield were the main protagonists in the original Resident Evil. We've never heard of Alice before. She's completely new to the franchise, and she basically takes the place of both Jill Valentine and I'm sorry, not Chris Redfield, Claire Redfield.
Yep.
In the subsequent movies.
Yeah. Alice was not great. Like, I like Milla Jovovich. She's a great actress, and like she played the role good. It's nothing to do with that. It's just the character was just. It's like Wes Anderson made the character purposely to overwrite everything about the games. Like, to take all the cool characters from the games, just put them in a corner and be like, this is what I think should be in Resident Evil. My wife. Because you know the two got married because of those movies. Like, it just became a series of Wes Anderson making his wife do cool things and overriding video game characters that everyone loves. But those movies,
I agree with you entirely on that.
Those movies are quite something.
So let's talk about the second act of the game. This is where things get really interesting with Resident Evil 3 Remake. So in the original Resident Evil 3, Jill Valentine is the one who goes into the police station, but this time around it's Carlos and Tyrell. Now, what did you think of that versus the experience in general? I will say this. I like the fact that they brought the lickers back.
Yes.
Because those were not in the original Resident Evil 3. So it basically expanded that palette of monsters that they had in the game. How did you feel about the return to the police station here versus in the original Resident Evil 3 game?
I love Carlos and Tyrell. They were great characters. That section in RPD was cool, but we were robbed. Having Jill go back and be able to have Jill actually go into the STARS office, see like Chris's desk and everything after what they'd gone through like 2 months before. I got this fucker. We should have got that. Like, it was cool going back there as Carlos, but it should have been Jill. It absolutely should have been Jill. Like, the whole point of going back to RPD was so you could see where Jill was working, like before the mansion incident, and like where her office was, like where like all the STARS people were. And obviously now going back as Carlos, you don't get that same like significance to it, kind of. Because obviously Jill, I can't remember in the original game if they played up Jill's PTSD much, but obviously the remake did. Like, one of the greatest things that I think the remake changed about the original was that it added so much more of the PTSD stuff that Jill was suffering from after the mansion incident. And having her actually go back into her STARS office, where there used to be people that worked, that she was friends with, that were killed in that incident, would have been really good to build that whole PTSD thing up and like flesh it out more. Why they chose Carlos to go there, I don't know. I'm not sure why they made the decision.
I feel like it was to try to do the same thing that Resident Evil 2 did, where it split up the campaign between, like, for example, when you're playing as Leon, for a very small segment of the game, you also play as Ava. And likewise with Claire, you play, I forget the little girl's name, but you...
Sherry.
Sherry, thank you. You play Sherry for a little bit as well, and I feel like that's what they were trying to do with this game, where it breaks it up a little bit, so you have to basically switch your tactics around.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think they needed to do that, though, because originally there was obviously the hospital section that we still got in this game, where Carlos goes to get the cure for Jill. Like, that would have been fine as, like, the only Carlos section. It annoys me that we could have had a scene where Jill goes back to RPD, is stalked by Nemesis in the RPD in the same style that Mr. X stalked Leon and Claire, and we didn't get it. Like, it's sore. That's still sore.
What the hell was that thing? Oh, there's a much more again, I gotta say it. This is the third time iconic moment that we're gonna revisit in a few minutes. That I feel like you would agree with me on that they should have included with Resident Evil 3 Remake. That features Jill Valentine. But for now, we're going to move on to the first boss battle that you have with Nemesis once he's mutated into his second form. Now, in the original Resident Evil 3, he basically was himself, but without his jacket on. He had a bunch of tentacles. The battle wasn't much different, only he used his tentacles a lot more to drag Jill around, that sort of thing. Basically, he becomes beast mode in this one. And he's just crawling around all the buildings and stuff. He lunges occasionally. That's about it. How did you feel about this version of Nemesis versus version 2 from the original Resident Evil 3?
I liked it. I think the reason they changed it was because Mr. X's boss fights when he was, or his one boss fight when he was more mutated, was very similar to Nemesis's originally. Obviously just without like, the guns. So I feel like maybe the reason that they changed it up in this game was that they didn't want it to feel like just fighting Mr. X again. But at the same time, I don't know. The reason that I'm not a massive fan is that we didn't get to see Nemesis in his stage 1 form for long enough, in my opinion. There's even concept art that they made of Nemesis with a minigun, as well as a flamethrower and a rocket launcher. And I feel like they should have had one more boss fight with stage 1 with a minigun before he mutated. But as for like the stage 2 form itself, I actually enjoyed the boss fight. I thought the boss fight was pretty cool. The fact that you can stick the mines to the wall, and like when he's climbing the clock tower, you can hit the mine and have it explode and fall off the wall. I thought that was kind of cool. And of course, I mean, bitch can't even swim. That is iconic. I will happily say that's iconic. That was a great line.
See, but I feel a little bit differently towards that, because I felt like the mutation was more earned in the original Resident Evil 3, because when he originally mutates, it's because of... Was it the train crash? Or no, it wasn't the train crash. It was after the helicopter crashed into the clock tower. But I felt like the mutation in the original Resident Evil 3 was more earned, whereas here he just sort of fell into a lake.
Yeah, you didn't actually see it happen either. Like, you didn't see any of it happen. You just sort of popped out, and it was like, oh, look at me, I'm like a xenomorph now. I agree with that. Like, at the very least, we should have seen him actually mutate. We should have seen the mutation process in itself. Like, see him, like, I don't know, see him, his clothes burning, and he pulls, like, the safety tape off that is inhibiting his growth, and all of a sudden you just see him, like expand massively and become this huge beast. I feel like that would have been a lot cooler than just having him, like, jump into water and then pop out as a big four-legged xenomorph.
Exactly. Don't get me wrong. Bitch can't swim is an epic line, but I still feel like we were robbed a little bit from what could have been. Yeah. So moving on to the third act of the game, we get a very similar boss battle. Now, in this one, he still runs around the facility just like he did when he was in the clock tower courtyard, but you also have zombies in this particular battle as well. Now, how did you feel about basically being a replica of the last battle, but having little minions as a result?
I didn't think it was amazing, honestly. It wasn't bad, but it was far too similar to the clock tower fight. It was just the same thing all over again. The whole thing with him hiding behind the acid vats was like, I don't know. I don't know if that was originally meant to be more of a mechanic for this fight, and they had to cut it late in development or something, but it just feels like that's so pointless when you can just stick mines to the floor and have it run over them. Like the thing where Carlos calls out what vat is behind just seems so pointless to me.
It was pointless.
And the amount of zombies as well that spawn is like, even on, I've been doing the game today actually on Inferno, I believe, the highest difficulty. And even then,
Oh, wow.
it's not even that bad. Like, they spawn pale heads as well as regular zombies, and also I believe there's some Nemesis Alpha Parasite ones as well. But other than that, it's like not enough of a threat. Like, if each dispenser spawned maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 zombies, so there was like a little horde of them, that would have been better. Because then it would have felt like you were fighting like 2 formidable enemy classes. Whereas now, where it's like 2 or 3 zombies and Nemesis, it's not like that big of a deal. I don't think it's... the boss fight wasn't bad. It just, I don't know, it wasn't... It was too similar to the Clock Tower one. That's my main complaint.
It was a copycat.
Yeah, it literally was a copycat. Like, even down to like what the Nemesis does, he runs circles around you on a wall or on the I don't know, on a wall or on a vat. That's basically what he does in the Clock Tower fight, except he runs in circles around you on a wall or up the Clock Tower. It's like not that big of a deal.
He reminds me of a rabid dog. I couldn't help but say, "Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy?"
He does. He definitely does. I agree with that.
All right, so we're going to talk about the last battle of the game. Now, I don't know if you got this far in the original Resident Evil 3, but the original Resident Evil 3 did have a railgun. It was called the Leviathan.
Yeah.
And your goal in that one was to lure Nemesis into the line of fire. It was a stationary gun. You couldn't move it around. But in the remake, this thing is like twice the size of Jill, and it's mobile.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious to see what your thoughts are on that.
See, I've actually never seen the original boss fight. That's something that I probably should see. I am going to play through RE3 original at some point soon, just for comparison's sake. But I feel like the last boss fight, from a cinematic point of view, was really good. From a gameplay point of view, not so much, especially on Nightmare and Inferno. The boss fight is just awful. It's terrible on that. It's not.
I haven't
like
played it on those difficulties yet. What exactly happens on those modes?
Okay, so before you do it, before you go into a playthrough on those difficulties, make sure you have the infinite ammo rocket launcher just for that fight. Trust me, like, it's awful. So you have to like each what they call it, the little power things that you have to push back in. Each time you push one of those in, the Nemesis gets back up. So you have to do 3 stages of the boss fight, and each stage you have to pop all, I think it's like 8 or 9 blisters on its body.
Oh my gosh.
Sometimes they don't even go down in one hit. The health of them seems entirely random. And some of the Nemesis attacks are just not balanced at all. Like, I'm pretty convinced some of them weren't playtested, like, at all. So, for example, this is one where he gets both of his hands, like, almost together and slams down on the floor really, really fast, loads of times. If that hits you once, you can't move anymore. It just infinitely staggers you and you're done. There's another one where he slams his hands down, like palms straight down, or with his hands like in fists separately. Again, you can survive 2 hits of those, but if you get hit once on full health, you literally cannot get out because it just infinitely staggers you. And you have to do that whole thing 3 times. It's not.
Oh no!
It's not fun. It's so bad that even speedrunners have complained about it and said that it's broken. Like, when speedrunners who know the entire game like the back of their hand and spend all day rerunning the campaign to get the fastest time are complaining about it, then you know something's wrong. The boss fight is... I don't mind it on, like, assisted, standard, and hardcore, but Inferno and Nightmare, it's awful. It's genuinely terrible.
I bet it is. Like I said, I used to speedrun the original Resident Evil 3 on its hardest setting. Almost on a daily basis. And I could clock it in at around 1 hour and 26 minutes. And it wasn't that big of a challenge once you knew it, but none of the boss fights ever felt unfair or imbalanced. It was just knowing the game. And here, I feel like you're exactly right. Some of the encounters are imbalanced. They didn't play test it enough. And that brings me to my final point that I wanted to bring up with you in terms of Jill and the final boss. There's a quote that Jill says in the original, and it is said in this game, but not at the place where it should have been. It's, "You want stars? I'll give you stars."
Yeah.
Now, in the original game, she says that at the final boss fight when she fires the railgun. And I feel like that would have been so much more epic. See, this time she actually says it in the subway station.
Yeah.
But I feel like it would have been so
Yeah,
much more epic if she had shoved that railgun into Nemesis' mouth and said that same thing. That would have been a perfect finisher.
I agree. It's annoying as well because where she does say it, it gets interrupted like 9 times out of 10 because Nemesis is right behind you, and if you stop to get that that health spray, then he hits you, and she stops saying it. So like I actually saw quite a few Reddit posts like in the weeks following the game's release from people saying like, wait, what? Did they cut the stars? I'll give you stars line, and everyone was like, nope, you probably just got interrupted and missed it, and it turns out everyone did. Yeah, I mean, I like what she said at the end, but it's not even close to "you want stars? I'll give you stars." That was such a goddamn good line. Like, I get chills even thinking about it. It was so good. It was, granted, maybe a little bit cheesy, but like, who cares? Who cares? Like, Resident Evil is kind of cheesy. That's part of the charm of it. Like, that's part of what makes it so great. And I just feel like they should have had that. They should have had that in that final cutscene, or in the final boss fight, sorry.
It would have been epic for sure. I have 2 final questions to ask you. We're going to wrap this video up. I have 2 final questions to ask you. The first is, what did you feel like was left out of the original that you would have loved to see in the remake?
Puzzles. More puzzles. One of the things that I love most about Resident Evil, and have done since I started playing it, are the puzzles. I am an absolute sucker for video games, like adventure games like Resident Evil with puzzles in them, and not enough games do that nowadays. And RE2 bringing them back in like full fashion was great, and then seeing almost all of them cut from this game was kind of annoying. Like, what puzzles were there? There was the tram one, there was the optional one where you collect all the gems and put it into the Kite Bros rail thing to get the pouch and the shotgun attachment and the grenade. And there was, I mean, technically, if you want to say it's a puzzle, there was getting the antidote, even though that wasn't really a puzzle. Whereas the clock tower was packed full of them. That was like the whole point of the clock tower. It was meant to slow the pace down, have it be focused on puzzles and like exploration, all the while you're being stalked in the shadows by Nemesis. That was perfect, and they cut it. Of all the places to cut, that was the one that they shouldn't have cut. Like, the park, like, yeah, it sucks, but I'm not gonna lose sleep over it. Like, it wasn't like the highlight of Resident Evil 3, whereas the clock tower kinda was. So yeah, puzzles are the main thing. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
Not to mention the cutscenes for the clock tower are fantastic. When Nemesis shoots the helicopter down.
Yes, we were robbed of that.
Yes, we were. Very much so. So the next question I want to ask you is, what did you feel like Resident Evil 3 Remake improved upon when it came to the original?
All the characters. I mean, Jill and Carlos's remakes. Jill's in particular, or not remakes, sort of like updated designs. Jill in particular is like perfect. Like, Jill now is, I think, my favorite character in the entire franchise, above Leon. RE3 Jill was literally, I can't even put into words how perfect she was in like every regard. God, this.
I think HiddenXperia has a crush on Jill, folks.
I was just about to say, it sounds like I'm simping here. Nah, but for real though, like, from the voice acting, I know people are still mad that Julia Voth wasn't casted as like the facial actor and everything, and I understand that. But what's her name? Sasha Zatova. She was great. I forgot the name of the voice actress as well. She was, again, absolutely fantastic, along with Carlos's voice actor and Nikolai's and Mikhail's and everyone else's. All the voice actors were great. For me, I think the biggest thing that I loved about it, that it improved over the originals, is something that applies to both this and RE2 Remake, and also what I hope applies to RE4 Remake as well, is like just how cinematic they make them, while also not having the cinematic sort of feeling interfere with the gameplay like a lot of games do. I love how sort of serious they take the story now. Like, obviously there's still jokes and stuff, but back in the day, the dialogue was a bit cheesy, like a bit too cheesy in a way.
Jill sandwich.
Exactly. Okay, that's one line that should have been in the game. That's one line that they should have kept in the game. But no, I love the updates for Jill and Carlos in particular, and also how cinematic they've made the games now, and how much more serious they seem to take the story. Like, not that the originals didn't take the story serious, but a mixture of the questionable voice acting in the scripts and sort of like the overall presentation in the original games seemed a little bit, I don't know, I don't know how to say this without pissing off a lot of really OG like Resident Evil fans. A bit gimmicky, not in like a bad way, but a bit silly almost. Whereas now they feel quite serious and like they're trying to tell like a super serious story with like implications and with consequences to characters' actions. I love that. And then of course as well, there's the graphics. The RE engine looks absolutely fantastic. The facial animations in particular are incredible. So the RE engine was a welcome addition to Resident Evil 3.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I absolutely love the remake. It's not perfect. It could have been a lot better, but I still love it. I still absolutely adore it. I'm currently playing through it for the 6th or 7th time, and I'm not bored of it at all yet, so it's a good sign.
Very nice. And I gotta say, I feel the same way you do. You know, when I give something, I don't know if you've seen my review for this game yet, but for those of you who think that when I put the tag on sale as a rating for a game, that means it's bad, it's not. It means I recommend that you buy it. It just means that maybe you're not going to get a full $60 out of it. Yeah. And so that's what I felt like here, where Resident Evil 3 Remake is a fantastic game in its own right. If I had never played Resident Evil 2, then I would have been so drawn into Resident Evil 3. But having played Resident Evil 2, I feel like that it just missed the mark a little bit. With that being said, I have one last question for you, HiddenXperia, and that's this, because we talked about Code Veronica earlier. I have desperately wanted Code Veronica to be remade in the same style that Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 were remade. Yeah. And my thoughts on you are this. Should Code Veronica be remade? And if so, should it be DLC for Resident Evil 3 to make it feel like a full game, or should it be a standalone game?
Standalone, definitely. The only reason that I think 3 should have been a DLC for 2 was because of the amount of shared assets. Code Veronica needs that needs its own game, in my opinion. It absolutely should be remade, because when you look back, the story of that game bridges a massive gap between the end of 3 and the start of 4 with the fall of Umbrella. Like, if you only play 3 and then play 4, all of a sudden Umbrella's like gone and you don't really know why. Whereas Code Veronica kind of goes into that a lot, and I feel like we kind of need that as a remake. Yeah.
Do you wish that they would remake Code Veronica before 4, or vice versa? Yes,
100%. I'm one of those weirdos that is excited for the 4 remake. I'm nervous for it, very, very nervous, but I'm excited for it. But Code Veronica should absolutely be before it, in my opinion. Absolutely. It like that game, the story for that game, the story for that game is so important to the overarching narrative that it was originally meant to be Resident Evil 3. Like, Nemesis was meant to be a spin-off and CV was meant to be 3. And the story kind of reflects that. So I feel like now would be a great time for Capcom to sort of course correct the original narrative and put things in the order they were supposed to be in, as opposed to what they're seemingly doing and just remaking 4 and leaving CV behind.
Capcom, I hope you're listening to that, because we are both looking forward to a remake of Code Veronica. Please. And hopefully it'll hit the shelves before Resident Evil 4 Remake. I'm looking forward to Resident Evil 4 Remake too, but I definitely want a Code Veronica first. So I want to thank everyone for watching today. Thank you, HiddenXperia, for taking the time out of your busy day to sit down and actually do this interview with me. I know that you're a busy guy. If you haven't checked out his channel yet, I'm going to post a link in the description below. You should definitely check out his Halo lore videos and his upcoming Resident Evil videos as well. I'm so excited to see those myself. And I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy day to sit down and watch this video. I do hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, I hope you consider subscribing for more great content right here on the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful week. I'll catch you right back here next time with HiddenXperia as we do this with Resident Evil 2. And as always, I'm the Tyrant, signing off.
Cheers, fellas.